Thank you for joining us on the webinar. We're going to just give 1 or 2 moments for people to join, to make sure they're connected, to make sure that the dog doesn't run in and spoil it all for them, and to make sure that Jonathan's ready as well. So just bear with us for a few seconds while we wait on people, and then we look forward to welcoming you to this webinar today. Okay, so once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this webinar, Blockchain Technology and the Applications of Blockchain Technology to Real Estate. Thank you very much. This is the London Governance and Compliance Academy, and the LGCA is a multi-accredited UK learning provider specializing in the areas of governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity. Now, I wonder what you feel about blockchain. Is it all exciting potential, or is this all a bit of hype? Are you disrupted by it or distracted by it? Do you feel it's secure? Is it perhaps an invitation to criminals? Who's worried about the impact of blockchain and its disruption, and who's excited about it? And of course, today particularly, what does all this mean for the real estate industry? Our speaker today is Jonathan Price. He's an expert trainer at LGCA. He's both a lecturer in business law and also in finance. And he serves as a board director in a number of commercial enterprises covering technology, healthcare, and real estate. He qualified some years ago in law and finance, and with more than 30 years experience, he is very well equipped to explain key insights in today's very fast-changing world. Throughout his career, Jonathan has maintained an international perspective as well, and a desire to help others, which has led to his role in a number of voluntary organizations. So today, if you have questions during the course of the webinar, keep a note of them. If you want to post them, please don't post them in the chat. Post them on the Q&A, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And towards the end, if we have some time, we will try to cover as many questions as we're able to do. Now, here's a phrase I haven't heard for a long while. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts, sit back, and prepare for takeoff. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon. And good afternoon to everybody else. I'm speaking to you from the dining room of my house, as working from home these days, as all of us are, in sunny South London, where the sun is actually beautifully shining through my window, so explains some of the colouring in the background. Now, it's a great privilege to be giving this webinar on behalf of the London Governance and Compliance Academy, because the Academy is an accredited training partner of so many different institutions, and you can see the ambit of our students from this list on the screen in front of you. Of particular note is the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, which is the professional association for investment bankers. And I'm very honored to be a fellow of that institute. So it's ironic that after all these years, I'm now teaching under the aegis of my own institute. Now, today we're going to be talking that's a bit about me, but you've heard about that already. Today, we're going to be talking about blockchain technology, which is, of course, in the news, very, very trendy because of the amazing rise of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is making blockchain technology something that everybody's heard about. I'm just checking on my phone, actually, to see at this precise moment what the value of Bitcoin is. It is down a little today at 55,000 US dollars, but still an enormous achievement for something which some people would say has no substance to it at all. So our starting point, of course, today is to spend a few minutes thinking about what blockchain technology is and seeing how it underpins Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, because we mustn't forget about the others. Although Bitcoin dominates and is still approximately 2/3 of the market cap of all cryptocurrencies, there are a lot of other cryptocurrencies. And then we're going to try and cut through some of the excitement and the hype that goes with it and give some thought as to why blockchain is relevant in the most conservative and traditional of all markets. That's the market for real property, the real estate market. And we're going to end up by having a look at some examples of where blockchain is actually being used today in real estate. So let us start off then by asking ourselves, what is blockchain? Well, blockchain is the technology which enables digital cash. Now, for many, many decades now, financial institutions and what we would call today fintech companies have been trying to work out a way of creating digital cash. Now, you may think, well, of course, I have digital money. I use it all the time, every day on my Visa or my MasterCard. But actually, that isn't digital cash in the same way that paper banknotes or plastic banknotes are cash, because the difference between digital cash and electronic bank money is all to do with how the ownership of the money is transferred. If I go to Starbucks, for example, in the morning, in the days when Starbucks is open, and I want to buy a coffee before I start work at the university in the morning, I can pay for my latte by handing over a £5 note, from which I will get change. Now, what I'm doing there is I'm transferring the ownership of that banknote to Starbucks simply by handing it to them, because as we lawyers say, title passes on delivery, because a banknote is a bearer instrument. But if I instead choose to pay with my contactless card, something quite different is happening. It's not money going from my card direct to Starbucks. No, that's not what's happening. What's happening is that when I tap my card on the point of sale machine, that sends an electronic message to Visa, assuming it's a Visa card, and then Visa corresponds with my bank, and that my bank then through Visa corresponds with the bank of Starbucks, and a transfer is made in the ledgers of the two banks, which has the money being moved from my account to Starbucks's account on the ledgers of the bank. And to show how the basic difference between this and digital cash is because if there was a power cut after my coffee had been made, but before I'd paid for it, I would be unable to pay with my card. They'd have to give me the coffee for free, because without the connection to Visa and to the banks, the electronic bank money system won't work. Whereas if I had digital cash in my card, it could go straight to Starbucks. Those of you who live in London have seen something which looks very like digital cash in the use of the Oyster cards that we use to travel around London Transport on the Underground and on the buses. This is much closer to digital cash than the electronic bank money payment card is. So the essence of digital cash is that it passes directly from the person doing the buying, person buying the coffee, to the person selling the coffee without passing through the banking system, without passing through Visa or MasterCard. So it doesn't sound like that's an awfully complicated problem. Why couldn't people just simply create digital cash? Isn't it easy to have a file on a card or on a phone that represents a pound or £5 or £10? Well, yes, it is easy. Unfortunately, it's too easy, because any digital file can be copied. And so if you had digital files on your phone representing cash, there'd be nothing stopping you taking copies of them. So you'd be printing your own money, which unfortunately is not allowed. So this problem, which has bedeviled people who are trying to create digital cash, is known as the double spend problem, because there is nothing basically stopping you spending the same pound or euro twice. So this had puzzled people for a very, very long time. How do you, creating the digital cash is not a problem, but stopping people spending it twice is the problem. And the solution to this was devised by Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he or they may be, back in 2008, and proposed most notably in a publication in 2009, which combines three different elements together to prevent the double spend problem. So this was the solution that Satoshi Nakamoto proposed to the double spend problem. And this solution comprises the use of cryptography combined with a distributed ledger, which can be downloaded and used by anybody, anywhere for free. And this distributed ledger is a peer-to-peer system, which means that it has no central authority. So he worked out that this distributed ledger, together with the cryptography necessary to make it work, combined with the proof of work concept, which is the act of breaking the cryptographic code, which those participants in the distributed ledger system do, combined together, these three elements prevent somebody from spending the same digital cash more than once. And the way it does this is that the transactions that are involved in whatever it is that we're doing, selling coffees by Starbucks or whatever, are all linked together chronologically, sequentially in a chain which cannot be altered once the transactions have been entered into it. So unlike my £5 note, once I've given that to Starbucks, they can then give it to someone else, and they can then give it to someone else, and there's no record as to where it's been. But with a blockchain, every transaction that takes place is recorded immutably forever and ever on the chain. So it is easy to see, once a Bitcoin has been spent, where it was spent and who it was spent with. And so it's clear that that same Bitcoin cannot be spent a second time. So it solves the double spend problem by creating a transparent record of all transactions made using that particular coin. So that is basically how a blockchain operates. So the blockchain solves the double spend problem, but how is that relevant for property? This is the question that we're really going to address today. What is it about the real estate market that makes technology like the blockchain useful? Well, to understand that, you've got to have a good idea what the challenges are which are presented by the real estate market in the traditional way that it operates. And one of the key problems with the real estate market is lack of transparency. When you're walking down your local high street, you're walking past all sorts of buildings, you don't know who owns those buildings. You don't know who's lent money against them. And it can be quite tricky, actually, to find out who owns these buildings and who has rights over them and who's lent money against them. And when the buildings actually change hands, it can be quite difficult again to see this happening. It's not something that happens in the public view at all. And this lack of transparency and the fact that people often operate in the real estate world using companies established in offshore locations, like islands in the Caribbean, for example, means that there's a terrible lack of transparency in the property world. And as a result, property is very frequently used by criminals for money laundering. The United Nations Office on Drugs estimates that 1.6 trillion US dollars of black money is invested in real estate. So a very, very large sum of money. And so this is clearly undesirable for societies as a whole. A second massive problem with the real estate world is it's very expensive to do anything. We all know this. If we've ever bought a house or a flat or something, it's really expensive process. Even in the UK, where real estate agent fees are relatively low compared to some other countries, it's going to cost around 6% of the value of the property to buy a property. Of that 6%, 4% is tax paid to the government and 2% is going to be the fees paid to the agent broking the transaction together with the legal fees. In other countries, like in the United States, for example, it's quite common to have to pay out 7 or 8% to the realtor handling the transaction. And in other countries, like France, for example, there will be a very large sum of money payable to a notary for taking charge of the documentation. It can easily cost a quarter of the value of the property in fees to buy a house in France, which is why houses don't change hands very quickly. And this fact that houses and apartments and other types of property don't change hands very often leads to a lack of liquidity in the market. In a capitalist system, the market prices are determined by the forces of supply and demand, but they only operate properly in a liquid market. So you require market liquidity to set the proper price of an asset. And if assets are not changing hands very quickly or very often because of the high fees, the high level of friction, that means the market is not liquid, which means the prices are not accurate. Not only is it expensive to transfer over property, but it takes a lot of time to do so. This may be particularly the case in residential property, where you have chains of buyers and sellers all linked to each other. But even in commercial property, where this isn't normally the case, you generally reckon to take between 3 and 6 months to buy or sell a commercial building, which is a terribly slow process. The final two problems with the real estate market as it is done traditionally both have to do with money. The first one is that to invest in particularly commercial property, but property in general, requires a great deal of capital. And most of this capital has to be committed up front. That is to say, you have to have resources available to you before you can invest in real estate. That in turn leads to a rather anti-democratic situation, because smaller investors, individual investors who would like to invest in property, are unable to do so because they cannot simply afford to buy a building. And so as a result, what happens is that small investors get shut out of investing in property, or else they're forced to invest by buying the shares of property companies, and that brings along a lot of baggage with it. So you can see here we've got 6 quite considerable challenges posed by the traditional way that the real estate market is done. So let's think now about how blockchain might change this, how blockchain might make things easier. Well, and let's start off with transparency, or the lack of transparency leading to the potential for fraud, which I mentioned earlier. Well, the solution that is being developed is to hold all the property titles, that is, all the documents and the ownership records should be held onto a blockchain. Because once somebody's name is entered onto the blockchain as the owner of a property, this cannot be changed. So it becomes impossible to defraud somebody of their ownership of a property simply by changing their name. You see, what happens today is that title documents get forged, or they get altered, so people get scrubbed off. This is not possible on the blockchain, because once on the blockchain, your name is on there forever. The second thing is that you can see your name on the blockchain, because the blockchain is a transparent historical ownership chain. So you can see that your name is on the title of your property. And you can also see who owned it before you and who owned it before them, because all of it is there visible to see. This will make it much more difficult for criminals to use real estate as a means of laundering their dirty money, because it will become very clear who owns what, and the authorities can then ask them where the money came from to buy the properties that are on the blockchain. The next 3 challenges I mentioned were high fees charged by intermediaries, a lack of liquidity, and a slow transaction speed. Now, all of these problems originate from the same source. That is the fact that we are using paper-based transaction processes. Because all of these papers have to be prepared, first of all, and they often require lawyers or notaries to prepare them. Then they have to be checked, and then they have to be filed, and they may well have to be checked again. Because filling in these forms, creating these papers, drafting these leases, drafting these property sale contracts, which we call conveyances in English law, because all of this is specialist work that an ordinary person, somebody who's not a trained lawyer, could not do, it enables the lawyers to charge very high fees for this work, even if it's unjustified. I remember some years ago when I bought the house which I'm currently sitting in, my wife, who is a property lawyer, decided that she would do all of this work for us herself. And she, to help her in this, she bought a book which had been written by another property lawyer, giving a step-by-step guide to the process. And this book was called The Conveyancing Fraud. And the reason for the title was the author of the book, who was himself a lawyer, felt that his fellow lawyers were charging far more than was deserved for the process of documentation. Just bear with me a second. I'm just going to switch my light on because the sunlight is causing a problem. I don't not sure if that's helped so much, but anyway, sorry about that. Nothing I can do about the sun. Now, if the process of moving the ownership from the seller to the buyer were digitized and put on the blockchain, it can have several really interesting and important effects. First of all, it removes the need for many of the intermediaries. There's no longer a reason to employ the notary or to employ all the lawyers that are there, because the process can actually be translated into a series of steps which are machine readable. Now, I have to explain one more thing at this point to make this understandable, and that is something called a smart contract. There is a particular type of blockchain called the Ethereum blockchain, which is multifunctional. Unlike the Bitcoin blockchain, which has quite limited functionality, the Ethereum blockchain, which is the second largest and most important one, acts as a platform, almost like a base operating system in a computer, on top of which you can write applications. And you can write all sorts of applications to all sorts of different things. But one sort that you can write is called a smart contract. This is a contract that self-executes. It's been compared as an analogy to using a slot machine, a vending machine. If you want to buy a bar of chocolate from a vending machine, if you put in the appropriate coins, or if you put your contactless card up against the card reader on the machine reads it. You can select the chocolate bar you want. The machine will take your coins or debit your card and present you with the chocolate bar. So this type of contract is called an if this, then that contract. And you can, on the Ethereum blockchain, create contracts which work in exactly this way. So you could say, for example, let's assume that we are looking at the transfer of a house. And one of the things that has to be checked is whether the property taxes have been paid up to date by the seller of the house. So you could set your smart contract to check this. And so if the property taxes were up to date, then the contract could go to the next stage, could self-execute. And if they weren't, then it would stop at that point until some remedy had been made and the property taxes had been paid. Now, because all of this can be programmed to be done by machines, which work much faster than humans, it removes most of the delays. So it can take a process that at the moment takes 3 to 6 months and have it done in a matter of hours, if not faster. So using the blockchain removes the intermediaries, or some of them, introduces a much faster transaction speed, thereby creating liquidity for the whole process. Now, the final one is very, very interesting. And this is the one about money. The fact that in order to invest in property, you have always needed to have a lot of money. And so as a result, if you didn't have a lot of money, if you were just a small investor, that type of investment was closed off to you. So it wasn't a very democratic process. So the rich got richer because they could afford to invest in property, and the poor stayed poor because they couldn't. So how is blockchain going to help with that? Well, we have another concept here to understand, to introduce, which is tokenization. Tokenization. Tokenization is a bit like a technique that's well known in the financial markets called securitization. because tokenization involves taking an individual asset, which could be a building, let's say an office building, for example, and subdividing it into very small units, which can then be sold to small investors. What kind of units these are is a matter that can be a matter of choice for the organization putting together the tokenization. They could, for example, be conventional things like shares or units in a fund, but they could also be cryptocurrency coins. So you could have a coin or a token representing a small share of a physical building, giving you the direct ownership of a small part of a real asset. So this tokenization can open up individual, interesting, valuable assets to investment by small investors, which is something which is a very, very worthwhile ambition, as I'm sure you can see. At the moment, as I said, individual investors are forced to buy units in property funds, which tend to have quite high management fees attached to them, or they have to buy shares in property companies with all the baggage that goes with a property company. I've met a lot of chairmen of property companies, and I've never met one who didn't drive a Bentley. For those of you who are not into cars, as I am, Bentleys are very expensive limousines. And the point I'm making is that the management of property companies sometimes seem to be running these companies for their own benefit, not for the benefit of their shareholder owners. And you would remove the need for having such individuals involved if you were able to tokenize the assets themselves. So you can see, looking out at this universe of the real estate industry laid out in front of me. I don't know which city in America this is, but I thought this is a brilliant photograph. You can see that there are lots and lots of potential applications for blockchain. So let me end off before I hand over to questions by giving you some concrete examples of where this is actually happening. Because as with many things to do with cryptocurrency, there's sometimes lots of talk and less action, but here there is actually some action taking place. So what I've done on this table is I've tried to set out some examples of the real use of blockchain in the real estate world, covering some of the key challenges I've been talking about. So take transparency to start with. The first name in the second column, Landmateriet, is the land registry for the Kingdom of Sweden. And that Swedish land registry has partnered with a software firm, a blockchain firm called ChromaWay, to develop a blockchain for land registration purposes in Sweden. Here in London, Her Majesty's Land Registry is attempting the same thing in its own, using its own resources. So it's not partnering with any outside blockchain company, but it's developing internally a blockchain in what it is called its Digital Streets Initiative. So this is a pilot project, but the clear direction of travel is that ultimately all registered property in the United Kingdom will be contained on the Land Registry's own blockchain. Moving outside Europe, the Republic of Georgia, which, as you may know, is a fairly small republic in the Caucasus, which was many years ago part of the former Soviet Union. The Republic of Georgia, which is now a democratic country, has partnered with blockchain company Bitfury to produce a blockchain for all registered land in Georgia. So you can see in various parts of the world, land registry is going to be a key area where blockchain is going to be used. Then turning to the buying and selling of property, in many countries, particularly the United States, but other countries too, they have something called an MLS, or multiple listing system. And in the United States, there are several companies looking at how to improve the multiple listing systems. Now, at the moment, the multiple listing systems is simply a function of what the real estate agents, the realtors themselves, put into the system. This means in practice that it's full of inaccuracies and it is subject to manipulation by people who have got particular things they wish to achieve. So a much better idea is to have a blockchain-based search system, or search engine perhaps, for real estate. And Propy and Imbrex are two firms who are producing such systems. Propy, for example, describes itself as connecting real estate agents and buyers by streamlining the purchase of new homes. It helps home buyers to request what they are looking for so that sellers can attempt to fulfill their wishes. It claims to have listings located in China, the United States, the United Kingdom, and India, as well as one or two other countries. And it's using blockchain to secure the data storage and exchange. So there we are. In terms of fees and the speed of transactions, two companies actually using blockchain are Reezy and ShelterZoom. Both of these are using smart contracts. I'm trying to find, sorry, on my iPad in front of me, some further details to give you about these two. ShelterZoom and Reezy are essentially operating an escrow system for the key documents required for transferring title to property. So the documents are prepared and entered into the ShelterZoom system, and then smart contracts determine when they are activated. Remember, if it's an if this then that way of operating. So if this step is done in the process, then that document can be released digitally, and that can be done instantaneously. It's not a matter of sending it by mail to the other side's lawyers, then taking the time to read it, think about it, and then react to it. None of that. It's all instantaneous. If this is submitted in due form, then that takes place. So that is the actual transaction process for real estate transactions. Then BrickBlock and Smart Realty. BrickBlock is a way of raising capital for real estate transactions. BrickBlock enables, in a crowdfunding way, buyers and sellers to be matched up. So buyers to be matched up with properties through a crowdfunding exercise, and sellers to be matched up with crowdfunding buyers. So this enables the investment to take place uh, thereby allowing small-scale investors to invest in properties through a crowdfunding mechanism. And finally, perhaps the most significant of all, although in a sense I'm cheating slightly because my understanding is that it is not yet using a blockchain, although it plans to do so shortly, is the International Property Securities Exchange, or IPSX, which is a new authorized stock exchange, a recognized stock exchange in London, which has been created to tokenize buildings. And after a little bit of delay caused by COVID, they have tokenized their first significant building, which is the Mailbox in the city of Birmingham, which is a large multi-use shopping mall, basically, shopping, offices, a shopping and office mall in the center of Birmingham. And the Mailbox, which is also the home of BBC Birmingham, the Mailbox has been entered as the first property onto IPSX. It's been listed and tokens are available for retail investors to buy. And so this is actually a major step forward because it's such a valuable piece of real estate. So there we are. I hope you can see now that not only does blockchain have a number of use cases for property, that actually some of these are being put into practice and things are actually being done in the real world. So I don't know if any of you have got any questions based on any of that, but if you have, I will try do my best to answer them.
Jonathan, thank you. That has made things an enormous amount clearer from my perspective, and I'm sure from others who are on the webinar here. We do have a couple of questions, and we'll certainly try to take them. Let me ask you this first question that's been posted. I've heard a lot about blockchain being rather bad for the environment because of all the electricity that it uses. Now, what's your response to that?
Well, I think this is a valid criticism, but it is likely to be most important for situations where there are a large number of small transactions taking place. So my example of buying my cup of coffee in Starbucks is a good example of this, because where you have a large number of small value transactions is where the need for electricity consumption is greatest.
Yes.
In the field of real estate, where even with tokenized assets, the transaction speed is going, pace of transactions is going to be a lot lower. And where we're talking about big assets, it's going to be relatively few and far between. I think that's less of a problem, really. So it's the nature of the industry makes it less of a problem.
Yes, thank you. I think that's helpful. Yes. As you were talking, I was thinking of that lovely phrase, turkeys voting for Christmas. And I look at the estate agents market and those involved in that. It seems rather unlikely that these intermediaries that you talked about are going to be jumping on this bandwagon very quickly. Do you think they'll ever get round to using blockchain in reality?
I think it's, if left to their own devices, they wouldn't, no. I think the chairman of the property companies rather like their Bentleys.
Absolutely.
So no, they wouldn't. I think the progress in this is going to be driven by the tech side of things. And I think the customers and the tech companies are going to meet in the middle, and they're going to cut out these intermediaries. But having said that, I don't think you should worry too much about your local estate agent, because it's going to take a long while for this to break through their monopoly.
Yes.
No, I don't think they are going to welcome the ones who are forward-looking. For example, if you think of the IPSX I was just talking about,
yes, indeed,
that has got some serious property players involved in it and supporting it. So the more enlightened ones will see an opportunity.
Yes, you're right to suggest. I think that time is on the side of the Bentley suppliers and those who are wishing to buy them with their proceeds. Jonathan, we're going to round the call out at this point now, after 45 minutes. Once again, thank you. This has made things so much clearer. And I think for all those listening, we'll be able to see how this can be applied into the real estate market and into the real estate business with great effect. And certainly, I speak as somebody who's bought a number of houses. Oh my goodness, 6 months of pain reduced to a much shorter period of time must be hugely super.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
it's a great
So I
objective
thank you
to
so
have.
much for your expert involvement. Let me just mention to all those who are still on this call that we have a whole bunch of these webinars coming up. There'll be many more things provided in the coming weeks and months. Please stay in touch with us. If you haven't yet been to the website, go to the website, take a look, see what's being offered, see what's available. You'll be surprised at the huge variety that we're able to offer in terms of training and provision for you and for the companies that you work with. So I look forward to joining you again. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us there.
Thank you, Brian.
And enjoy the garden. It looks like the sun's shining. You go and spend a half an hour outside, eh?
I will. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jonathan. And goodbye to those who've been on this webinar.